I walked into my kitchen, the first time I'd been home in 18 months. I had just returned from Afghanistan, and there she was, a woman I didn't know, cooking with my grandmother's skillet. Her husband was sitting on my couch, and their kids were eating at my table. I stood there for a second, not quite believing what I was seeing. It felt like I was intruding in my own house. She looked up, like I was the one who didn't belong there. "Excuse me," she said, as if she was the homeowner, not me. I just stared at her. Then at the lease, she waved in front of me. "We pay rent to Margaret Whitfield. We live here legally," she said, like that made everything okay. I froze for a moment. Then the door opened behind me, and in walked Margaret herself, dressed in a designer purse and a smug expression. She stepped into my house like she owned it. "Jake, you're back early," she said, looking right past me. "Property abandonment requires proper HOA procedures." Abandonment? I had been deployed. I didn't need to explain it. But Margaret didn't care. She didn't need to. She thought she was untouchable. And I guess that's what happens when you're the HOA president for 6 years. Nobody dares challenge you. But I had news for her. This was about to get very interesting. You see, Margaret Whitfield was the kind of person who made you feel small just by existing. She had that entitled air about her, like she'd read too many home improvement magazines and convinced herself she was the star of her own reality show. That's how she became the HOA president of our neighborhood in Sunset Hills, a place where the lawn lengths were measured with rulers and Christmas lights were timed like they were on a countdown clock. She was 52, drove a white Lexus that reeked of desperation, and had once sold real estate until she got caught up in some shady deals. She was a liar, pretended she cared about foundation cracks and water damage while overcharging clients. The courts had yanked her license years ago, but that didn't stop her from running our little community like it was her personal kingdom. The funny thing is, I never saw it coming. My name is Jake Brennan, a third-generation Army guy. I joined when I was 18 because I was tired of bouncing between foster homes after my parents died in a car crash when I was just 8. The Army was the closest thing to a home I ever had, and at 28, I bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch using my VA loan, the first real home I'd ever owned. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I poured myself into it, restoring vintage motorcycles, fixing up my garage, making it my own little sanctuary. But when the call came for Afghanistan in January 2023, I followed every protocol. I made sure my mortgage was paid, my utilities were set up on auto pay, and I asked Mrs. Fiona, my 70-year-old neighbor, to keep an eye on things. I even told the HOA about my deployment during the January meeting. Margaret, sitting there at the table, nodded, took notes, asked about emergency contacts, and seemed genuinely concerned. Or so I thought. 3 months into my deployment, I received a violation notice from Margaret. My grass had grown a little long. Mrs. Fiona, bless her heart, tried her best, but she was old, and my lawnmower was too heavy for her to handle. Margaret, instead of offering help, slapped a fine on my door. The notice was still stuck there when I came home. I couldn't believe it. But what could I do from halfway around the world? Nothing. And that's when Margaret took it a step further. She started proceedings to have my property declared abandoned. She dug into some obscure HOA bylaw that said if a property was vacant for 90 days without proper notice, it could be temporarily managed for community benefit. She ignored the fact that I had told her about my deployment, ignored the fact that I had a neighbor looking after things. She dug up some fake paperwork, backdated it, and before I knew it, my house was listed for rent on Craigslist. I'll never forget the feeling when I first saw it. Margaret had found a family to move in, Maria, a nurse who smelled like hospital soap, and Carlos, who had the calloused handshake of someone who knew real work. They had no idea they were walking into a scam. They thought my house was abandoned, that I was just some soldier who couldn't be bothered. Margaret pocketed $8,000 in rent deposits. For months, I served my country while Margaret lived off my house. But everything changed the moment I came home. I walked into the HOA office with my deployment papers, bank statements, and a mountain of anger. Margaret greeted me like she was expecting this, sitting behind her oversized desk like she owned the whole damn building. I showed her the paperwork. "You have no right to do this," I said, my voice steady, but there was a storm building inside me. She handed me a stack of receipts for certified letters, all supposedly sent to me about the abandonment clause. The dates were fresh, too fresh. I could spot a forged document from a mile away, and I was right. This was all a lie. Margaret sat there, confident, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew she was cornered. I didn't just fight back. I brought the truth with me. I spent 2 days at the county recorder's office, digging through old records until I found the proof I needed. Margaret had never filed abandonment papers with the county. She had never included the rental income in HOA reports. Her whole scam unraveled right in front of me. But I didn't stop there. I brought the case to Veterans Legal Aid, and Sarah Rodriguez, the attorney who took me on, spread everything out like a deck of cards. Document forgery, theft, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. It was a federal case. But Margaret wasn't done yet. She started harassing the family living in my house, trying to push them out so they wouldn't testify. Margaret had underestimated me. She underestimated the whole neighborhood. Soon, my neighbors, veterans, military families, and Mrs. Fiona, who had been watching everything, started fighting back. One by one, the lies started to fall apart. Margaret's reputation crumbled. The whole neighborhood turned on her. And when Margaret tried to bribe me to drop the case, I knew I had her. I had evidence, recordings, and the truth on my side. And I wasn't backing down. The tipping point came when Margaret broke into my garage, tried to plant evidence. She thought I wouldn't notice. But I had security cameras installed, and I was watching her every move. I called the cops immediately. She showed up just as the police were questioning her. The look on her face when they arrested her, priceless. From that point on, everything changed. Margaret's reign of terror was over. She was arrested, and the truth came out. Her scam wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she'd taken advantage of: vulnerable neighbors, elderly residents, military families. Margaret had been playing people for years, thinking she was above the law. But she was wrong. As the case went to court, Margaret was hit with federal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The community she thought she could control had turned the tables, and Margaret was finally paying for what she had done. The lesson here? Some fights you just can't win, especially when you're messing with the wrong people. Margaret thought she could steal from a soldier, but she didn't realize that soldiers don't abandon their own. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. So what would you do if someone tried to steal your house while you were serving your country? Margaret thought she could win, but in the end, she lost everything.